Welcome back to Mishpacha Magazine's Take Two, where the names, the figures, the faces, the ideas familiar to you from the pages of the magazine come to life for deeper discussion. Rabbi YY Jacobson certainly needs no introduction. There isn't anybody watching this show now who hasn't seen a clip, heard a Devat Torah, heard an idea, seen a vart printed from Rabbi Jacobson over the last 10, 15 years and said, wow, I need to hear more from this man. So it's a schus, a real schus. And anybody who knows how difficult it was to actually get him to come into studio today knows how overwhelming it is to actually be sitting across Rabbi Jacobson. Welcome. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you for the honor.
It's you're a busy man.
Thank you for the privilege.
This was quite the feat getting you to come in, and we don't take it for granted. Rabbi Jacobson, forgive my blunt style for asking. What is it that you do?
Now you sound like one of my children. Who for years have been asking me, Tati, what do you do for a living?
This is for a living. You created a role. Let's go into Lubavitch, where things are shlichus. So I'm a shliach here, and there's a shliach to different geographical locations. There's shlichum to cyberspace. What is your shlichus? What is your role? What is that you do that you see yourself as your role?
Great question. By Jews, I think we respond to questions with stories. So when I was a young child, it was one Shabbos afternoon, and I was standing at a Shabbos afternoon Farbrengen gathering of the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. There were maybe 5,000 or 6,000 men in the room, and he suddenly turned to me and he asked me a question in Yiddish that I'll never forget. He pointed his finger at me and he said, "Von wann weißt du, as da Welt?" How do you know that the universe exists? Nobody ever asked me such a question. How do I know the world exists? Besides, I wasn't listening to his talk. It was deep, intricate sichos and maimarim and explanations and shiurim. I was doing some other things. I was a little kid. I didn't know what to say. How do I know the world exists? But now there's 6,000 eyes looking at me. The Rebbe is waiting for an answer. 15 seconds that seemed like eternity. And I wasn't answering. All I was thinking is, live and let live. Move on. Talk. I'm not disturbing you. Don't disturb me. But then with a big smile, I guess, he felt he had to answer for me. So he said, so this child answers in Yiddish. He said, Entveter, this boy, this young man answers. You know how I know the world exists? The beginning of the whole Torah is, in the beginning, Hashem created heaven and earth. And then he went on. So from a pedagogical point of view, it was a wise move, because the next Shabbos I was listening from beginning to end, because I didn't want to be again caught.
Was that a big story? Was it a big thing to be singled out?
It was very unusual, unusual. In 40, 50 years, it was very, very rare.
For the Rebbe to point at a child.
Anybody. He had his style. He would talk for many hours, so this was very rare. As I got older, I wondered, what was this all about? Today, I look back and I say, perhaps it was some form of a mission statement to be able to help people from all backgrounds, all persuasions, all over the world, to be able to see themselves and the universe from the perspective of Bereshis Bara Elokim, as Hashemayim v'Saaretz. And it's really what I try to do, to try to help empower people to see themselves as ambassadors of infinity, as divine ambassadors of love, light, hope, authenticity and healing.
Okay. It's quite the mission statement, but on a very practical level, the person has to get from point A to point B, right? You can't go tell your mother when you're 17, I'm going to be an ambassador of, right?
Infinity.
How does a person, you went from you being a chayzer of the Rebbe, I think you were following, let's say, the traditional path for somebody who's serious about learning and serious about Chassidus within Lubavitch, right? You were learning, you were writing, you were a chayzer of the Rebbe's Mamar, and all of a sudden, I wouldn't say you landed on the scene slowly. I certainly was familiar with your father, Olav Shalma, with the Allgemeinen, with his work, his literary work. So, and I was familiar with your name as well. But one day it just became like your message was everywhere. How did that happen? How did it evolve? Was it a plan? Just take us through the last 20 years.
Yeah, so I don't know
that you were a Rav of a shul? Were you a mashpia in a yeshiva? Were you teaching in a classroom? How did you get from point A to where you are now?
Right. So it's a good question, and the truth is, I sometimes ask myself the question, even if that sounds a little cliche or dramatic. I never planned on this. This was not the trajectory that I was strategizing about. I never went to a life coach who said, choose this career and this is how it's going to happen 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. When I was a bacher, yeshiva bacher, I had the privilege of being on the team of what they called chayzrim, oral scribes of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who were responsible to memorize and transcribe many hours of talks for publication over Shabbos and Yom Tov. Of course, there were no recording devices. So I did that, and I did that dutifully for many, many years.
It's quite a daunting task.
It was...
How do you force yourself to memorize something? It's not a trick. You really have to.
No, not a trick at all. And the Rebbe didn't speak for 5 minutes. The Rebbe could give sichos that were an hour, 2 hours, and if a bringing could go from 3 to 8 hours.
And you would write it down, and the Rebbe would review it himself?
Sometimes he would review it. Most of them he didn't review.
Wow.
He just asked that it should write that it's not reviewed. It's called Bilti Muga. He did not edit it, so people understand.
And did you ever get feedback from the Rebbe?
Yeah, a lot of feedback.
Positive?
Mostly it was feedback of a real critic, meaning critic of the highest caliber who demanded and saw the potential of writers to be able to try to deliver an impeccable product, at least as far as humans are concerned. Extremely nuanced, extremely focused on accuracy and authenticity and truth and structure and syntax and style.
So you knew if you weren't doing a good job, you would have known about it.
Yeah, and if your reference to Tosfos was wrong, there had to be footnotes. You know, if the reference to the Rambam or Tosfos or even the Maram Shif or the Bir Hagro was wrong, it was very upsetting to the Rebbe.
This must have been an impressive team. You must have had yourself and the people around.
Well,
you must
the chief chayzer is a Jew today in his 90s, Rabbi YY, who was there from 1950. And every few years he would take in a few new bachrim who he felt were skilled to get involved in this. I have an older brother, Reb Simon, who was involved in this, and he brought me in. So this was a team not of many people, 5, 6 people. It was extremely daunting. I mean, you're talking about farbrengens that could last between 3 and 7 hours. There could be an hour shir on a Gemara in Zvachim, and then there could be a siyum on Tmura or a Hadron on Shas, and then an hour Rashi Sikha and Rambam, and then there's Kabbalah and Zohar and Chassidus, then there's Jewish philosophy, Meir Nevuchim, Chekira, Machshava. Then there were contemporary issues. It was Israel and education and leadership and outreach. And and the flow was just endless, and the Rebbe wasn't a gesture, meaning it's not like half of the speeches were jokes.
Can I ask you a question? I'm curious, just as an aside. Did the Rebbe quote things that were not the traditional Chabad sources, other Chassidus Svarim, or even not Chassidus Svarim, often? And if yes, what were they? What would have been the prime? I don't mean Rambam and Rashi. I mean later. Were there any Svarim that the Rebbe drew on heavily outside of Chabad?
Constantly.
Like
constantly.
What would you say?
I mean, you see in the Sichos. Among the last generations, the biggest was Tzafnas Paneach, the Rogatchover, who he considered one of his teachers and masters. But I remember once Achron Shal Pesach, he did a whole long conversation about a sugya that was in Chidush Reb Chaim Alevi al Rambam.
Do you ever quote the Gain?
Yeah,
often.
Very often.
Yeah,
the Bir Hagra and Shulchan Aruch, but also all of his Svarim and Kabbalah. He had a tremendous piyus in the Svarim of the Vilna Gaon and Kabbalah, which is a rare commodity today.
Right.
Sifra Ditznius,
and what about the Rebbes who, so to speak, didn't get along with the Alter Rebbe? Those Rebbes who...
Yeah, he would quote them. Easily. I mean, listen, the genre of his Maimarim were Chabad. So the themes were from the Alter Rebbe.
Did the Rebbe ever quote any of the Rebbes?
But Noam Elimelech, huh?
What about the Rebbes in the Chabad dynasty who were not Lubavitch? The other Rebbes?
Like Kopos, Rabban Strashella, yeah, I heard myself.
Really?
Rabban Strashella, yeah.
Was there anything that you would say the Rebbe didn't know?
Listen, you remind me now of an amazing story. Gewaldige Meise. This happened at a chasana. The Balatanya was present, and there was a batchen. He was a Chabad chassid. How do you do batchonis in front of your Rebbe, and especially the Balatanya? So he said a little l'chaim, so it should be a little Purim dik, so, he would let loose. And everyone is looking, the Balatanya is sitting, and this batchen gets up and he says, Rebbe, after long contemplation, I decided there's no major difference between you and I. Everybody is shocked. He says, Herzog, and I have to say it in Yiddish and then I'll translate. Was ihr weiß nicht, weiß ich euch nicht. What you don't know, I also don't know. Was ich weiß, weißt ihr euch. Whatever I know, you also know. Elamai, so what's the difference? There's a few things that you know that I don't know. But now I want to ask you, the gulf between what you know and what you don't know, isn't it infinite? And the Alter Rebbe started to cry when he said that. So Rabbi Yosef Albo writes, Tachlis hayediyah shaloi neda'acha. The ultimate knowledge is the knowledge that I don't know. In the Arizal, there's an expression, Reisha de lo yisyada. The head, on the top of everything, you reach the unknown. In Eitz Chaim of the Arizal, there's a portal called Shar HaSveikus, the portal of doubts. So I once heard from the Rebbe, he said, I asked my father, how can you have in the writings of the Arizal, Shar HaSveikus, the greatest Kabbalist in Jewish history, the portal of doubts? Doubts, Sveikus? So he said, the Rebbe said, my father, who was a Makubal Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, he said, told me, there are Sveikus that are inferior to knowledge, and there are Sveikus that transcend knowledge. It's a different type of doubt.
Here, very elegant answer. Okay, so you're by the Rebbe, and you're being a chayzer by the Rebbe, and you get married, and you're still in that position. You're not.
Well, the Rebbe passed away when I was 22, so I was still a yeshiva bach. I was learning, writing. Obviously, it was a very painful period for a person like myself and friends and colleagues. I continued learning in yeshiva for years. I continued learning. My father, Zechron Levracha, started to lose his best Yiddish writers. You had people like Dr. Hillel Zeidman, like Bensi Goldberg, like Nissen Gordon. These were classic, real Yiddishisten who created Yiddish journalism, since the 1930s, and they were dying. And in desperation, I guess, he turns to me and he says, he called me Yosef Yitzchak, he says, could you write me a Yiddish column? I need a Sedra of the week. Dr. Zeidman passed away, could you write? I'm like, this is not my thing, this is nicht my fach. But he asked of me, and I started to write this weekly column in the newspaper, and then somebody started to ask me to give a shir, Tanya, in Borough Park, and a shir, Gemara here.
Was there somebody who identified you and said you could do this?
No, it was. And then one day I get a call from a rabbi in Highland Park, Chicago, a very fine man, and he said, I read your column in the Allgemeiner, and I love how you write and what your message is. Could you come over and do a Shabbaton? I said, you got the wrong guy. I don't do Shabbatons. I don't travel.
But you must have known that you could speak, that you had this gift of being eloquent.
I spoke in yeshiva, chaburas. I gave over the sichos and the maimarim and the shiurim of the Rebbe, but it was in that format. Okay. It wasn't, what you would call Mr. Lecturer or speaker. So he says, I'll pay you a ticket. Come to Chicago, speak to my community. I said, I don't know what to say. He says, just say ideas and insights. So I went. He paid for the ticket, whatever it was, and I spoke to the community.
But then it was economy stuff.
Yes, for many years it remained economy, for many years.
Yeah.
Until, I'll tell you how that changed if you want to know. And I gave, and I guess the Olam enjoyed, because the next week, a rabbi from Great Neck phoned me and said, could you come for Shabbos? So, things just started to develop. And just one thing led to another thing, And
what was your first formal posting, rabbinic posting?
My first rabbinic posting was in a shul in Crown Heights called Beis Shmuel. Before that, I was a Maggid Shir in a yeshiva over there, one of the yeshivas over there in Beis Medrash. I would give a shir Iyun and a shir Pekiyas in Gemara for many years. And then this shul needed a part-time rabbi, Beis Shmuel, so they asked me, and we began.
You never considered going away on shlichus, going out on shlichus? Or you were too busy in Crown Heights?
I considered it a few different times, but the workload was pretty intense, and I was seeing Hatzlach in my own way. And I love teaching.
Did you always have, forgive the question, and there's no premise to the question. If it sounds like it's an uneducated question, it's a lack of education on my end. Did you find that you had a unique ability for Lubavitcher Chassid to be able to talk to non-Lubavitcher Chassidim, to be able to walk into, a lot of times, people who belong to certain Chassidus their whole life, so to speak, they don't really understand the language of other places. You have this ability, today you certainly have it, that you could walk into virtually any community in Klal Yisrael and talk to them on their terms, in their nusach, and their lingo, based on their svarim. Was that something you always were able to do?
It's a great question, not offensive at all. I actually appreciate the question very much. And the answer to that is, I always grew up with this spirit, I would say, of really appreciating diversity and understanding that Klal Yisrael, and really the world, is a rainbow. And Aruch HaMeretz Midur Rechavam Min Hayam, the Torah is infinite. And there is a unique taste and flavor that you could find in each individual who is a unique reflection of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and certainly in each community and in each collective. I grew up in a home that was extremely sensitive to diversity. My father was a very colorful figure in his own way. He was a real journalist. He was a newsman. He loved press conferences, and he loved journalism, and loved politics, and loved
Down
the news.
to the trappings of a journalist, the hats.
Yes. The hat and the cigar.
Right.
And remember, in those days, before the internet, before fax machines, before computers, it was typewriters. My father had typewriters everywhere in the house, and he had around 300 ribbons. People don't know what ribbons are today, but if your ribbon would finish in the typewriter, there was no ink anymore. So he had ribbons everywhere. So if there would be a war for 10 years, he would be able to type.
Even in the world of film journalism, he was a little bit of a mechadish. That means he was ideologically, right?
Yeah, he was very unique, because you have to understand the world of journalism.
He was progressive.
You
meaning
could say so.
Lubavitch was, so to speak, would be a right-wing Chassidus politically, and he was left-leaning politically. Could we say that?
Well, in terms of Israel and questions of Jewish identity and education, he was a very staunch.
No, I don't mean. I mean in terms of giving back land and peace and things like that. He was
so he was quite a right-winger. But the interesting thing about him, which you don't see, is that on the pages of his newspaper, he had a bunch of left-wing writers, and he would not censor them.
Right.
He allowed,
even though Lubavitch was from the most extreme.
Yes, because his newspaper.
Did the Rebbe appreciate that?
I think the Rebbe had a very deep appreciation for this.
Do you know if the Rebbe read the Allgemeine?
Oh yeah, that I know. That I saw many times. I saw that the Rebbe would sometimes come from his house with the Allgemeine, and he would often give feedback to my father. Yeah, criticism, compliments, but feedback. I saw many times also when he met him.
It wasn't Lubavitch a party paper per se, the Allgemeine, but over the years when there was politics, became a.
My father himself was a Lubavitcher Chassid. He was, I would say, a disciple of the Rebbe, or at least a very strong admirer of the Rebbe. But the pages of the newspaper were filled with all types of views. I mean, there was some very radical leftists who wrote there, and he would not censor them. So there was a very vibrant debate going on. And I also always admired, I could see him sitting with ideological opponents, and he would disagree with them, but never become disagreeable. Never be offensive or denigrating or insulting. It was always like there was an inner confidence that I don't have to delegitimize you in order to disagree with you.
And that impacted you.
We could really remain friends, and that was a great lesson.
You must have had your own curiosity, because it's for you. It's not just that you don't get offended by other people. You have a real knowledge in the Hungarian Oberland, and I've seen you in Satmar, Kleisenberger crowds. I've seen you in Litvischer crowds. I've seen you in modern Orthodox crowds, and you seem to have an appreciation for the Yerusha that each one of them have.
Right. So I always had that inquisitiveness and that openness. And it's extremely, from my perspective, it's very enriching. It's enriching when one can see the full spectrum of Yiddishkeit in all of its colors and all of its depth. And
do you think that other people don't do that? Not only Lubavitch, other Hasidim are scared that their children will find out too much and like something better, so they don't expose them to it? Are we cheating our kids when we create a system? This is our way, so we're our Messiah, so we're not exposing you to other Sfarim ways of thinking within Shulchan Aruch Yiddishkeit, obviously.
Right. Well, I think it could come from two approaches. I think sometimes there can be an insecurity over there. But sometimes, I don't know if it's an insecurity, it may just be that, people are comfortable in a certain path, and this is their comfort zone, and this is what they know about. But I feel that especially in today's generation, people are really thirsty and hungry to be able to have unadulterated Yiddishkeit in all of its grandeur, in all of its majesty, in all of its depth. And when they see that, it's very refreshing for them.
You think they didn't see it before this generation? You think 15, 20 years ago they didn't see it the same way?
I think there's much more cross-pollination now. I think there is much more of people being exposed to other communities. There's so much more traveling, technology, of course.
Did you find things from other communities that you didn't know that refreshed you?
Constantly.
Like what? Who's somebody or a sefer or a person or a discipline or a thought that you said, wow?
The Karlin tragedy just happened, Erev Shavuos. And I was inspired to open up a Beis Aaron. The next day I opened up a Beis Aaron. I learned Beis Aaron before. But it was incredible Torah.
Stalin.
The second, there was Reb Aaron Hagadol. The first Reb Aaron Hagadol was a student of the Maggid.
Right.
But then there's the second Reb Aaron, Beis Aaron.
Right.
Which really is the one, the father of the one who put into a sefer the Chassidus of Karlin, of Stalin. Just an example, just of recent weeks, it happened after right
Anything
before
from the
Shavuos.
non-Chassidish world? Any Sfarim, approaches, writings, speeches that you said, wow, this impacted me, this is something? I never knew that.
Constantly. I mean, throughout my youth, I tried to get my hands on. My father had a lot of books in the house, a lot of sperm of different genres, and not all were, mamish the holiest of the holiest, I would say. So I had a chance to cruise through many different types of sperm, many different types of groups.
In Crown Heights, doing your thing, speaking your nusach, and all of a sudden there's a demand for your message. How did you get from there to Monsey?
So I was there. I was a Rav there for a few years, and then I really felt that Crown Heights is an amazing community, but it's one type of community. It used to be, the center of all the communities, but then there was a mass migration, so Lubavitcher Chassidim remained, but most people left. And I felt that my mission, or my shlichus, as you call it, would be more effective in a community that was filled with Jews of many diverse backgrounds, which would mean Chabad Chassidim, but many other Chassidim, and Yeshivish people, and Litvish people, and modern Orthodox people, and Jews of different stripes and different colors. And Monsey is such a type of community. So that was one of the.
So somebody came in.
No, nobody came actually.
No, you just decided Monsey.
Nobody came. I did quite a few Shabbatons in Monsey.
Uh-huh.
In what's today known as Shiner's Shul or Chaim, I did some Shabbatons. I was here for different Yom Tovim, just as I did in many other communities. And I saw the energy, I saw the vibe,
and you
I
had
saw
a
the types of
formal
people.
position in Monsey, you're the Rav in China?
So when I came here, I had no formal position. I just thought I could continue doing what I'm doing before and just live here. Not very, it's part of New York.
A person has to pay tuition and bag of filter fish for Shabbos.
We have to pay tuition.
Gas in the car.
Yes, by doing it. So I was still traveling and lecturing, and that was a source of income.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure,
how does that work? That means, I don't, what is the industry of being a firm lecturer? They used to be in the Haim doing Magidim. When they finished, they passed around the hat, I think, according to legend, and people put in or didn't put in or took out even, based on, I guess, where it was and the level of Magidas, how inspired they were. How does that mean? Was there ever a concept in the firm world of paid lecturers before? And if a person's giving chizuk, is there a price on chizuk? If somebody needs chizuk, you're going to say...
It's a great question. It's really
it's
a great
okay
question.
Okay.
Wonderful, yeah. In principle, we all know the Maimon Chazal, ma ani bechina, ma f'ata bechina. You're not supposed to take a price for Torah. I didn't charge you for Torah. Don't charge anybody for Torah. Everybody knows the Rambam's opinion in Pirush HaMishnayos about rabbis taking salaries, about people getting money for learning or for teaching. We all know the Rambam's position. Subsequent poskim argue with the Rambam. However, that evolved in Klal Yisrael. It's a great question. Could somebody go give a shiur? Forget about a speech. Am I allowed to go give a shiur on any topic, or a daf yomi shiur, and get $100 for it? Get five? Well, it's a great question, and it's a great halachic debate over the generations, which is certainly a fascinating discussion. But I think that principle has to be maintained, even if you find a heter. You have to remember that in principle, you don't own the Torah.
It's a heter.
It's a heter. Ma'ani bechina, af'ata bechina. There's a sefer called Derech Mitzvah Secha by the Tzemach Tzedek. He was a grandson of the Balatanya. He tells a story there of a Jew named Reb Mendel Barer. Reb Mendel Barer was what you call today a Maggid, a preacher, a pontificator. He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And he was known as a Kaddish and a Heilige Yid, but he had a blessed mouth. And Tzemach Tzedek writes, Reb Mendel Barer used to say that he only gives speeches in places where they pay him. So you would think, he wants the money, but he wasn't that type of person. So they asked him why. He said, Pashat, wer bin ich zu sein Hazager zu andere Yidden? Who am I? Where do I have the audacity to give musar or rebuke or chastise or even give a message to another Jew who's a ben yachid of the Rebbeinu Shalom? Vu kimich? Where do I come to have the authority to tell you how to live or to inspire you or to give you musar? He said, Elamai, if the people are giving me money, so this means the Rebbeinu Shalom wants that this should be my keli, my vessel for parnasa. So then I have a heter to speak. Okay. But then he says, Shalach to shalach es ha'eim ves habonim tikach lach. The aim is the mother, the cause, the antecedent. The children is the result. He says, maybe I came to this city because I'm going to have a parnasa and I'm going to get money. But he says, don't get caught up in that. Shalach to shalach es ha'eim. Remember that essentially it can't be about that. And I think in my life, what I always, I tell myself, and I know that if I don't at least give as many speeches that people don't know about for free to people who need a chizuk, to situations where it's really not about money. There's no big organization, there's no big sponsors, there's no big donors, then something is off. In other words, if it ultimately becomes about making money, then ultimately I'm failing the people I'm speaking to, and I'm failing myself. So money is a component, an important component, I would say, but you always have to, and I also have to have that perspective of, what it's ultimately about.
So
And there's quite a lot of invitations that I get, from people, individuals, situations where there's really
I know. I've asked you personally over the years to speak to people and to make time for people where there was only Agmas Nefesh involved, and for sure you've been very accommodating. I know that. So the answer is that this is really that role, is what you're saying, of traditional. It's traditional Magidus in the sense that I'm funded by that, but I give myself as much as I'm able to be the Rebbeinu Shalom's, to that shlichus of inspiring Yidden and trying to sit with Yidden and listen to Yidden.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question? I was sitting once at a meeting with serious people, educators, and they were saying that there's maybe a problem or an issue in the wider firm world where mediocrity rises to the top, so to speak. They said people learn how to work within the confines of a maisid or an establishment or an organization. They learn how to survive by not offending anybody and not being too creative and not being too original and not being too innovative. And this way they don't step on the wrong toes and everybody's comfortable and they go like this till they retire and they get a pen and pencil set and everyone says, Hatzlacha, brilliant career. They said, and we're cheating people because no one becomes great unless they walk off this, I'm doing it my way. And the example they gave was quite a They said, Rabbi Jacobson just went one day, he said, I'm doing this my way. He landed in Muncie, and look, he's like a meteor shooting across the firm world, inspiring people, doing it his way, and there's no precedent, and there's no organization behind you, and you're not associated with any VOD of anything. You're just yourself, doing your thing on your website and on your terms, and like you say, the invitations are there, and somehow you've managed, I think, to cross the length and breadth of the firm world. What would you say about the premise of the question, which is that maybe we have an issue in letting people just do it their way and be as it pertains to yourself?
Wow. So there's the Even Ezra. The Even Ezra asks why Moshe had to be raised in an Egyptian palace. Shouldn't the first Rebbe of Klal Yisrael know what a Shalom Zacha looks like? An Upshernish, a Pidin Aben, a Bar Mitzvah? Moshe Rabbeinu never saw herring. He never saw sponge cake. He never saw Wachnacht. Come on. The first Rebbe. That's the Even Ezra's question. So of course he says, Soid Hashem Lirei, if God knows. But then he says, I'll tell you two reasons. Reason number one, if he would have grown up among Jews, they would have not respected him. Ein Navi B'ira. Every Yachna would have said, I remember your bris, I used to babysit. When did you become a Navi? Oh, when did you start hearing voices from God? That would be the end of Moshe Rabbeinu. The second reason, Even Ezra.
Where?
Rabbeinu Rambam, Parsha Shmos.
Okay.
And this is 1100s. This is not 2021. This is 12th century Spain. Rabbeinu Rambam, one of the great Rishonim and poets and the greatest commentators and philosophers in Jewish history. But then he says, I want to say a second reason. He says, if Moshe Rabbeinu would have grown up among slaves, he would have developed a slave mentality. And he could never stand up and revolutionize the landscape of planet Earth. He could never stand up to the superpower and make a mapecha, make a revolution. He grew up in an ambience of malchus, of royalty, of aristocracy. Such a person can change the world. I think that sometimes many of us feel, that if we keep the people down, we as a community will be more successful. And we don't let people flex their spiritual, psychological, physical, and emotional muscles to be able to become their best and deepest selves and change the world.
So we're not perfect in that respect.
And a few other things. And sometimes there's a real concern. We're afraid, what are people going to do with that freedom, with that expansiveness? Are they going to go beyond the pale? Are they going to go outside of Tchum Shabbos? In Russia, there was a Tchum HaMoshev, there was a pale of settlement. I don't want you to go out of that pale. And we understand that because Messiah for us is divinely precious. Right? Rabbi Lezer says in Gemara, somebody who says something not be pi rabbi, goyim l'shchina shetistalik mi Yisrael, the Shechina leaves. We live thousands of years with a Rebbe and a Talmud that are so precious. And yet, you look at Rabbi Eliezer, he's constantly saying things, not in the name of his Rebbe. But he said, Lo yamarti davar shelo shamatim pirabi in Brachas and in Sukkah, many places in Shas.
Yeah.
And the answer, of course, is that Rebbe Eliezer heard in his Rebbe's words messages that other people didn't hear. He understood that the ultimate calling of Yiddishkeit is to be fully anchored in Shulchan Aruch, fully anchored in Dvar Hashem, not to be Mavat and a Kutzishal Yud.
But you're being Lamas Chos really on the way we are. It's not so bad. That means we're a nation that doesn't change. That's a big part of our DNA, is that we hold on and Messiah is real. It's not... so at the same time, it comes from a healthy place or a place that needs to be. We need to keep things tight, but at the same time, there's a cost. Is there an answer? I guess what I'm asking then.
There's a big cost. The Sfas says, Schor yemois olam, binu shnois dor v'dor. Says the Sfas Emes, medaf verstehen, shnois dor v'dor. The shinuyim, the changes of every generation. A message that worked in one generation may be completely irrelevant and ineffective. Sfas Emes knew about Messiah. But what the Sfas Emes was saying, the Badicheva writes, it says in Tosfos Yom Tov in 80 years, that Teku is Tishbi Yetaretz Kushis V'Boyas. Eliyahu Hanavi is going to answer the question. So the Badicheva has, the Helika Badicheva says, I don't understand. The Gemara says in Yuma, people just learned in Daf Yomi, Daf Hey, Moshe V'Aaron Imam. Moshe is going to be there. If you have a question in a Tosfos, do you go to Eliyahu Hanavi or do you go to Moshe Rabbeinu? Frag Badir.
Yeah, good.
This is what Tishbi Yetaretz. Ask Moshe Rabbeinu. Eken halacha. Why are you going to Eliyahu Hanavi? Eliyahu Hanavi is a great man. He's a malach. Moshe is the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messina. You know the Badicheva answers. Half of a fella. It's in Kedushas Levi Lekutim. He says Moshe has been 3,000 years in Gan Eden. Eliyahu Hanavi has been around. He's at every bris. Good. He's at every seder. He understands the struggle of a generation.
You gave me the sources. Okay, let me change the question a little bit. Okay. There's people in Klal Yisrael who work out of the establishment, and some of them have gone beyond the pale and taking pot shots at the institutions, the schools, particularly people like yourself. I know a lot of your time is given to listening to the pain of either children who have been rejected by the system or their parents, or adults who, as children, that's a big part of your message, comes from the veitug, from the pain that you've heard, and your desire to make change. You sit with a lot of victims of various kinds of abuse, and you felt their pain. At the same time, you're very much associated with the glory of the way we're doing things, that it's working. Either the system's working or it's not working. That's my first question. Is it working or is it not working? And basis, where do you see yourself? Which side are you? Are you in opposition, or are you in the coalition right now governing? Where are you? Are you with the team? Am
I with Bennett or Netanyahu?
Right. That means, where are you?
Okay. I want to tell you a little Torah I once heard from the Rebbe, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
I just figured out your trick. You just keep wowing people with the Torah, and then they forget.
Listen to the Torah, and you'll tell me if it's an adequate answer to your question, and if I could have given a better answer. You'll be the judge of Yisrael. When you interviewed many people. The Gemara says in Menachos Chavtesam at Beis, Moshe asked the Rebbeinu Shalom to see a shiur for Rabbi Akiva. He showed it to him. Moshe sat in the 18th row. He didn't understand Rabbi Akiva's shiur. Chol shadaita. He felt horrible. Finally, Rabbi Akiva was in the middle of a yisoid, and the student in the front row said, Rebbe, haminayin lach. What's the proof? He said, Allah Moshe Messinai. This comes from Moshe. Nesyash v'daita. Moshe, calm down. Asked the Rebbe and many mefarshim. Something is strange here. Moshe is the greatest humble man. Moshe anav moed mikalad. It says he always felt that if somebody else would have had his koiches, they would have done better. Finally, here's your test. Rabbi Akiva is giving a shiur, and you know what? You don't understand what he's saying. He has reached greater heights. You should celebrate. Say, wow, amazing. Chol shadaita. Why chol shadaita? What's the chol shadaita? And then he's quoted. Halachal Moshe Messina. Baruch Hashem. Thank God. Come on. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. You quoted me. I'm good. I don't understand a word. But the main thing is, what do they say? Write whatever you want about me, but spell my name right. Yeah? Something is off.
Good.
So the Lubavitcher Rebbe said as follows. Moshe knew that the Yesod HaYesodus of Torah is bittul to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Surrender to truth. Emes. Moshe looked at Rabbi Akiva, and he saw the dazzling brilliance, the charisma, the courage, the creativity. Lo yoyo yedeya, Well, Moshe couldn't learn. Everybody in the Beis Medrash understood, besides Moshe. Rekiva said up beside Reb Chaim, or Reb Griz, or Reb Shmuel, or Reb Nachum, or Reb Akiva Eiger. Everybody understood. Moshe couldn't understand. Sorry, I don't get this. Well, means Moshe was disturbed by something. He knew that Rabbi Akiva is sharing Torah, but he didn't see that complete humility and loyalty and alignment with the Yesod HaYesodus of Torah, which is, I'm here to serve God, not me. And this touched him, it disturbed him deeply. And then Rabbi Akiva built some extraordinary, magnificent foundation. And somebody said, Rebbe, what's the premise for that paradigm? Rabbi Akiva said, Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Now I have to quote Lubavitcher Rebbe in Yiddish. He said, Moshe das gehört to do that. Rabbi Akiva hat a Rebbe. Hat a Rebbe. When push comes to shove, at the moment of truth, of emes, he says the yesod of everything, if you go deep down, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Moshe says, this is emes, this is teres emes. And for me, it's what it's all about. I think every person needs to soar, spread your wings, and change the world in your own way, because every person has a contribution that nobody else could make. And when we crush that creativity, I don't think it's fair, and I think it's also a betrayal of our shlichus, because if Hashem gave a person talents, this is your light that you have to share with the world. It's not just we're not letting them be successful. I think we're depriving the future from their lichtigkeit, from their oil. But, and this is a profound but, each and every one of us needs to know that when somebody comes to me and says, Haminayalach, what is this all about? Who's ultimately at the core of all of your teachings and all of your strategies? If my answer could be Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Chazak.
Excellent. Very good. I'm curious about something. How, Bob Trepp is your Rebbe. You're grounded and you're basing yourself on what you heard from the Rebbe, and clearly you have a right. You spent enough time immersed in his teachings to actually be able to claim that you know what the Rebbe held. But the Rebbe's not here anymore. And a person needs a moral compass. They need someone to sit with. A, for inspiration. You're giving inspiration a whole day. You also need to go get inspiration. And Paul, you also have questions. So who's your Rebbe? How do you... Haminayalach?
That's a great question. So there are people I constantly talk to or consult to, previous rabbis, Rosh Hashivas, friends, colleagues, mentors, people that I respect. And the truth is, different topics, I have to speak to different people and get their advice, get their feedback. And this is very important. Aseh lecha rav, knei lecha chaver, a person that needs mentors and needs friends and so forth. But I do say that I still spend a lot of time learning the Torah of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, listening also to his shiurim. They remain for me a very, very powerful reservoir of inspiration, empowerment, invigoration, and perspective in turbulent times. In terms of my own inspiration, this is a personal avodah that I have to work on every single day. If a Hatzalah ambulance is taking somebody to the hospital, as I once told a Hatzalah guy, I told him, you got to learn a little bit every day. He says, I don't have no time, I'm saving people's lives. And I said, there was a guy in Hatzalah and he was taking somebody to the hospital, and then the passenger said, there's no gas. He says, we don't have time to fill up with gas, we have to get to the hospital. If I'm not filled up with gas, I have nothing to give. So this is so true about every teacher, every communicator. People feel it. Sometimes you hear a speaker. I was once at a speech, and when the speaker spoke, not only was everybody sleeping, he himself, it looked like that he himself fell asleep. He was bored of his own teachings. When you're not inspired, when you're not stimulating yourself, when you're not challenging yourself with new ideas, and you get bored of yourself. Somebody once said, I think I'm bored, and it's with me. So I think this is a critical component, and it's true for everybody, for every Rebbe, Rosh Hashiva, parent, Mashgiach, Menahel, Rav, Rebbitzin.
I don't know if you've made the decision, or if but you're associated, let's say, I don't know if a movement is the word, but there's a certain shift that has crept into Klal Yisrael over the last few years, and a lot of the people who pass through some of the places you're associated with, we'll say it like that, are part of this change. It's what maybe in the yeshivas they call sort of a kumzitz culture. That means we can't talk a lot about Averis, we can't talk a lot about Gehenim. That way didn't work. Too many people are broken, so many people are scared. We want to focus a lot on how much Rabbi YY loves every Yid and what it means when you put on tefillin, and we're going to make it easy for you. And also, there's going to be charcuterie boards on the side and a hookah and a guy playing guitar. People had a very hard time with it. A lot of people certainly felt very inspired by it, and people who weren't going to things before it certainly went. So I know that's a much bigger question. I'm curious how you view the phenomenon and your role within it.
Right.
I could really ask you anything. You really don't flinch. You're ready for anything.
I don't think, listen, I think when we're anchored in Torah, we can address every topic. Somebody once asked me, is there anything that we're not allowed to talk about? And I told them, look, there's a Gemara in Chulin Kuf Lametes. Haman min ha-Torah minayin. Haman min ha-Torah minayin? We don't talk about Haman. No. If there's something in the world, istakel b'raisa b'raham. There's a Torah perspective. Torah has what to say about Haman.
So what do you say about this?
Haman min ha-Torah minayin.
Does it make sense? Comes as culture? Do you know what I'm referring to?
I think I know what you're talking about, and I think we have to address two dynamics here, and both very authentic. The Yisayid HaYisayidus, the end of Kaihalas, Soiv Davar Hakal Nishma, Selikim Yeravas Mitzvahs of Shmar, Kizeh Kol Ha'adam. Vayitzavenu Hashem Lasas Es Kol HaChukim Ha'elu Liyiris Hashem Alekech, as Moshe Rabbeinu tells Klal Yisrael. The ultimate question I have to ask myself is, do I want to bring Yidden, Yiddische Kinderlach closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom, closer to Avos HaTorah, Avos Hashem, Avos Yisrael? That's the question. The Noam Elimelech, Rebbe Elimelech of Lezhensk, who was not part of the kumzitz culture, although maybe the whole Hasidic movement was seen as a kumzitz culture relative to the Lithuanian world, that's possible. But he writes in Parshas Koirach, he says something incredible. He says there's a Mishnah of a Mitzvah, Daf Yud, that if I find a Mitzvah, I find a diamond and I fall on it, and then somebody else comes, v'hechzik bo, he chaps it, the second person acquires it. So the Gemara says, why am I not koine it with Dalet Amos? I go into the 6 feet range of the diamond, it's mine. So the Gemara says, because he fell on it, Gala daite the benefilla nichele de likne, but Dalet Amos like nichele de likne. This person shows, I'm not interested in the Dalet Amos formula. I want to fall on it, and that's why doesn't acquire it halachically, and if you grab it, you take it. So the Noam Elimelech says, and I quote, you can look it up in Noam Elimelech Kairach. Okay. And I think this is the most accurate and authentic and deep response to your question. He says, sometimes you find a neshama. It's a metzia. It's a beautiful neshama. But he says, like metzias, you find them in unexpected places. Matzasi David Avdi, says the magician's dime. Sometimes there's neshamas, he says, they go through a lot of challenges. There's a beautiful neshama there. And then he says, comes a person and nafal Allah. A person falls on this neshama. He abuses the neshama, denigrates the neshama, schleps the neshama further into the abyss. Then a second person comes, v'hechzik ba. He says, he's mechazik the neshama. He lifts up the neshama. He lifts up the neshama. He shows the neshama how great it is. He says, the second person, zachaboy. You'll never imagine the schus of the second person who is mechazik the neshama. Frag the Gemara, come on, that's not the way. The way is Dalet Amos. What's Dalet Amos? The Gemara says, Meis mitzvah koine mekayme b'Dalet Amos. Dalet Amos is the size of a grave. 6 feet. That's the size of a grave. Says the Melech, you want to be koine somebody? Yaskilo yoim amisa. Tell him about Gehenim. Don't tell him God loves you and tell him how beautiful he is and how much potential he is. Don't start helping him identify his traumas and show him his deep psychological potential. Tell him the emes. There's Gan Eden, there's Gehenim, there's right, there's wrong. And if you don't come back to Derech HaTorah, you're going to burn in purgatory. Dalet Amos, that's how you koina. Says the Gemara, this is how the Rebbe Melech explains it. Kivan de nafal alei, goladaita, the benefila loy nichele delikna, bedal Amos loy nichele delikna. Since this person is in a state of nefila, you should know that your Dalet Amos speech will never be him kaina. And in his words, you tell him that he's going to die one day, lo chayesh lemissa. He doesn't care about death. He has friends who overdosed. He has friends who committed suicide. He doesn't care about death. You're telling him, be a mensch, be a man, make something of yourself. You're killing yourself with your drugs. I don't care. Death doesn't mean anything. To you it means something. To me it means something. To these kids it means nothing. The cemeteries are filled with their friends. These guys was like chayesh lemissa. You're not going to get him. He is so filled with pain and so filled with trauma. For him, death is relief. Don't you get it? Drugs is the way he escapes his pain. I don't have that trauma, so I don't understand it. I don't relate to it. I'm like, just be a normal person. Wake up in the morning. Be a mensch. Get a job. You don't have to be the Gadol Hador, but just be a mensch. Finish yeshiva. So says the Noam Elimelech, there's no way the Dalet Almas are going to be kind to him. Because look at him. He's so much nefila. Look at his lifestyle. The only way you could be kind to him is hechzik boy. You have to give him so much chizuk, and you have to hold on to him, and you have to remain attached to him. And that's what I feel. This is, I feel, Dvar Hashem. People who cultivate this approach save hundreds and thousands of souls from depression, from addiction, from the abyss, and sometimes from suicide. Now, are there people who utilize,
for whom Dalet Amos would have worked as a Kenyan, but because of this wholesale approach of hechzikba, they're losing it on the optimal Kenyan for them?
So I don't see this as a wholesale approach. I just have to say this to you. I don't see it as a wholesale approach. And those who may use it as a wholesale approach, right? I think they themselves often need that chizuk and mentorship and guidance. I know a lot of these people that we're addressing, call it the kumzitz style. And there's usually so much frustration and so much disillusionment. And people say, oh, just tell them the truth. Tell them to wake up and smell the coffee and grow up. Tell them to grow up. Here's the problem. We live in a generation where whether we like it or not, we can all deny it. But the trauma of 2,000 years has emerged to the fore of consciousness. Now you'll say, we had Zaydis and Bubas. They weren't traumatized. Stalin was not a source of trauma. Hitler was not a source of trauma. The Russian czars were not a source of trauma. Khmelnytsky and Turkmenidze and Vespasian were not a source of trauma. Suddenly in 2021, with the prosperity that's unheard of in generations with Tayamaz and Shalit Ad and Finaitim, with Pesach resorts, suddenly everybody's traumatized.
No.
Come on, right?
Good.
Great question.
Excellent.
So I could sit on a throne of judgment and sit in my cocoon and talk about the superficiality and the pustkeit of today's generation and wax eloquently about the good old days in Grodno and the good old days in the Altamir, the Mir I'm talking about in Lithuania, and talk about Baranovich.
Wait, that's not fair. Let's at least bring it over to Russia too. There was also Lubavitch.
Okay, Lubavitch.
And there was a lot of...
And Minsk. And Pinsk,
and Rostov,
and Rostov, and Liezhin, and Liadi, and Lyozhna, yes.
Right. Okay, yeah, you can go on now. You can proceed.
We play fair, you know that.
Yeah, don't just no Baranovich alone. Yeah.
Well, you just did a beautiful article on Rabbi Chanan.
The magazine. So,
Baranovich was in my head.
Off topic. Davi Zafir wrote the article for us, one of our best. He wrote this article on Rabbi Chanan. The feedback, it was so empowering to know that people don't just care about Trump or whatever. They want to hear about Elchanan. They want to go through his map through America in 1938, and they want to revisit Memphis with him. Yes. It was a humbling reminder to me that you don't have to talk down to people. Yeah. You can talk up to people. Sorry, yeah?
And Rabbi Elchanan once said, Amiret Rabbi Elchanan, his yahrzeit was just now, Yud Gimel Tammuz. He was shot.
80th yahrzeit.
80th yahrzeit, 1941. And Rabbi Elchanan said right before the Petir, which was in the article, that we're all karbonis and we should make sure that there's no mum in us, there's no blemish in us.
Shouldn't be pigel.
Those were his last
words. Kenratin brothers in America.
Rabbi Elchanan once said, V'shinantam levonecha, it says in Sifri, Rashi quotes, Elo hatalmidim. So yes, why doesn't it just say, V'shinantam letalmidecha? Teach your students. That's what it means anyway. It means teach your students, not only your biological children. And he says you would have missed the point. What the Torah is trying to tell you is the only way you can teach your students is if you see each student as a child, as a ben yachid, v'shinantum levanecha, my children. So I don't see, when I am trying to bring out the goodness of somebody, I don't see it as a wholesale approach, because we're living in a time when the fact is anybody who's dealing with this sugya, as they call it, this sugya of OTD, of kids in pain, of addiction, of kids not fitting into the system, knows the truth. You are dealing with so much brokenness. And I could sit back and say, ridiculous. The Haksta Chainik, nobody is broken. They're manipulating all of us, all the therapists and all the coaches and all the rabbis in order to get a kumzitz Judaism. And I say, I wish you were right. But the fact is, after 2,000 years, I think, my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, it's part of the Simanim of Geula. We were now given a mission to spit out from our system all of the untold layers of trauma that has been paralyzing us for a very long time. In epigenetics today, they know that trauma is bequeathed through the genes, which means you can have a 13-year-old, a 16-year-old who's struggling, not because their father is dysfunctional, or their mother has borderline personality, that too, or because they were molested or abused, that too. But it could be they're carrying something that comes from the Elta Zayda, from the Elta Baba, and they are forced to confront it. You are highly sensitive people who are dealing with a lot.
Let me ask it in a grub way.
Yes.
You have a 55-year-old accountant in Monsey who learned in Torah Vadas. He's a very successful, functional, ehrliche person. And he walks in every year, and the Chazan says, on the first night Slichas, his heart trembles, and he reaches for his Rabbi YY because he really wants to do tshuva. And now somebody said to him, well, why don't you come? The Rabbi Jacobson is doing a musical Slichas. It's different because I should come, I go to my shul, okay, and he couldn't find parking by a shul, and somehow he ended up, you have more parking by you, whatever it is. He walks in, and there's 19 guitars over there, and the vibe in the room is, wow, it's like the best Purim Zud in his life didn't come to this. He's never going back to hear Motzei Menucha again, and we forfeited that tremble in his soul for something. Maybe?
Great question. And you talk about the musical slichas, I think it's good to address
I'm
that,
giving you an example.
That's a classic example of this. And I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years. And I just want to share that with you because I think it's important to see how things evolve. In my community in Monsey, I've seen Mitzvah Shabbos Slichas. Somebody once came over to me and said, prepare us for Slichas. Make a fabrengen before Slichas, which was the minhag by many Chassidim actually, that before Slichas, for a few hours till 1, they used to have a fabrengen where they would have Divrei Eiros and Chizuk. I actually, myself, just personally, I'm not judging anybody, the musical Slichas is not something that speaks to me. I like to have a Slichas which reminds me and is a replica of the slichas that I grew up with as a child, which happens to be by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where there was no musical slichas. At the end they sang Rachamana Da'ane, Rachamana Da'ane, which is a beautiful, beautiful, heart-stirring old Chassidish niggin that was actually composed by the Rebbe's grandfather, the Rabbi of Nikolaev in Ukraine. So we had this beautiful fabrengen for a few hours. At the end, I announced, everybody now, I'm finishing 15 minutes early, 1:45, go to your minyanim, go back to your minyanim. And I went to my minyan, which was a very, what you would call traditional, conservative, b'maitzavei menucha kidamnucha tchila. However, I saw that there were hundreds of people who told me, they came over to me and they said, the only reason we're coming to Slichas is because of you. Can we do a musical Slichas? I said, Gesundheit, listen, you want to do Gesundheit. And therefore, every year I announce, everybody go your Slichas. I do the Fabrengen pre. But there are people who feel this is how they connect best to their souls and to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Now, if it's something that's outside of halacha, obviously, it should never be allowed. If it's something within halacha, does it become an obligation for Klai? But I think just to delegitimize a person who may feel a much deeper connection in their own way, I don't see the value of it. And let me just say one more thing. That 55-year-old graduate of Torah Vadas, have an intimate conversation with him and ask him if for the last 55 years he ever felt a real love to God and to Yiddishkeit with a lot of serenity and tranquility. A lot of these 55-year-old people may tell you My relationship with God is one of dread. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Elul are the worst days for me. All I wish is that they're over, because I know God is building a big Gehenna just for me and my sins. So I just want to say that for some people, that dread and that fear turns into a torment. And it's really a Yiddishkeit that is very, very restricting. Now, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. There is a Shita and there's a Mahalach in Klal Yisrael that focuses very much on that kav. And for some people, it's awesome and amazing. But just realize there's a lot of people who are suffering from a Yiddishkeit that they feel is very toxic.
I hear. This is my final question on this topic.
Okay.
What about the spillover message to the rest of the people? This is not associated with you, but over the last few years, there's been a lot of purveyors of the idea of Kilo Averos really don't matter, and it's really not real, because you could always, if you would know what tshuva, if you know how much Hashem loves you, and if you know you fall down, get back up, it's okay. It doesn't really make a difference anyhow. So, Kaidem Achet, somebody is overcome by Taiva, it's a lot easier to succumb when you know that could just really, there's an easy pass. I can go to Uman and say Tikkun Klali. I can give money to X, Y, Z. There's anybody ready to take your money for tshuva? And if worst comes to worst, I could really do tshuva. It's not that hard. Tshuva is the easiest thing in the world. Like one hero tshuva, one moment, etc. We gave this.
Excellent question. I would just say 2 points. Number one, every message, even the most glorifying and beautiful and most sacred message, can sometimes be misused. But the essential message here is not one that was neschadesh in the 21st century. Anyone who really studies all of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and all of his students knows that this message is repeated hundreds and thousands of times. And it's one of the fundamental yesodus of Pnimiyus HaTorah. And for the truth is, you won't only find it in Sifrei Baal Shem Tov, you'll find it by the Rishonim, you'll find it in Chazal, you'll find it in Sifrei Hagra, you'll find it from Chaim Volozhin. In Chassidus, it became a very powerful and accentuated idea, but it's not a Chiddush of Chassidus. Can people sometimes misuse holy, sacred ideas? Of course. But the fundamental idea is not that Averis don't matter. The fundamental idea is that your relationship with the Ribbono Shel Olam is absolute, it's non-negotiable, that at your core, that relationship is untarnished. So to the contrary, Averis is really an aberration from who you really are, and never think that just because you stumbled and failed, it really compromises or mitigates that essential purity of Itzumah Shel Yom HaChaper. Now I want to ask you a question, okay? What do you think would create a better and healthier relationship between you and your father and your mother or your grandparents? If you knew that your father and mother told you, listen, Rabbi Yisroel, or listen, Rabbi Yankel, or listen, Dvaira, these are the laws in the house. You follow them, you have a relationship with me. You don't follow them, you're done. Unless you come back and you repent, but till you repent, our relationship is gone. There's no love there, there's no connection there. Or you know that your father's love to you and relationship to you is absolute and unconditional, even if you do the stupidest things. And one last question. When you have a person who displays to you that unconditional love, do you think a healthy person says, wow, you're going to love me anyway, I have an idea. I'm going to take a dagger and drive it into your chest because you're going to love me anyway. And if a person does say that, don't you think they need serious help? When I give a message to people that your connection with Hashem is absolute and non-negotiable, even when you make a mistake, and he's always waiting for that ultimate alignment, and Torah and mitzvahs is not what makes you a child of God. It's because you're a child of God that he gave you Torah and mitzvahs. Do you think a healthy person would say, okay, let me just sin against this God. He loves me anyway. I think a person says, wow, if you are such a friend to me, I want to be close to you. I don't want to stab you in the back. And if a person doesn't say that, then they really need a Yeshua, then they really need a completely different type of treatment and help. I also want to tell you a word from the holy Zidutshover, Reb Tzvi Hirsch of Zidutshover, who was known as the Sar Beis HaZoyar. He answers a question of the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, the 13 attributes of Hashem begin Hashem, Hashem. Why twice? So the Gemara says, Kan koidem shechata, kan lachar shechata. Before you sinned and after you sinned. So the Rosh says, why do you need Midas Harachim before you sinned? I understand compassion after you sinned. Why compassion before you sinned? So the Rosh says, Hashem knows you're going to sin, so he needs compassion even before. The Zidutshover says, it's a real Chassidus word, I have to tell you. before you sin, you need a different type of compassion. Compassion for your arrogance, for the feeling of holier than thou. Me?
What can I say?
He says, before I sin, you need a different type of rachamim. The rachamim that allows you to be human and vulnerable. The rachamim that allows you to open your heart to people who are broken.
Rabbi, here, could I respectfully disagree or ask a question? It's not chas v'shalom, my place to disagree. It's a question.
Sure.
I'm a father of children. I think I have a nice relationship with my children. I would hope that they would want to listen to me. There's a big difference of how I would warn them not to go out of bed after bedtime. You can't have another drink, to how I would warn them not to play with matches. There's a very big difference. For the first one, about not going out of bed, I would say, please don't go out of bed. And if they came out and said, Shefel, please go. I asked you so many times, you're really great. You're the greatest kid in the world. Because it doesn't really make a difference to me that much. How much they violated, it's just a question of my own convenience. If they were playing with matches, or if I was the sort of person who kept guns in the house, or anything that has the potential to really harm them and change their forever, chas v'shalom, I would probably not say, Shefel, please don't play with matches. I love you anyhow. I wouldn't do that. We're dealing with chet, maybe severing, maybe chave creases, maybe things that can really impact the person's forever. Who says that just because I like my father better, that's the right way? You're playing with fire.
Right. But what if it's exactly the opposite? What if my only hope to have this child, this youngster, sees from the Chayavi Krisis and Mrs. Besdin is when they feel wholeness, because there's so much brokenness in them for whatever reason. I want to tell you a story. A boy came over to me after a lecture. I gave a shir about Shabbos. The last 20 minutes I spoke about the beauty of Shabbos. He came over to me afterwards and he says, I wish one day I'll be able to keep Shabbos. I wish. I wish one day I'll be able to relate to your words. I said, you didn't relate to my words? He looked at me. He looked if anybody was watching. It was private. And he says, how could I? When my molester chose Friday night in shul, after everybody left, he knew that Friday night nobody stays in shul because everybody goes to have a Shabbos meal. And that was the opportune time to utilize my body to be able to satisfy his demonic impulses and instincts. For 3 years, every Friday night, he says, I cannot keep Shabbos anymore because for me the word Shabbos triggers the deepest pain. Now, I listened to this story. I watched this boy. I could tell him, do you know that in the time of Besdin, if you would be Mechalel Shabbos, and there was Eidim and Asra, and I could describe to him the Mishnah, Masechta Sanhedrin, everything that they would do to him. I can do that. What do you think is going to happen? You think I'm going to get him to keep Shabbos the next Shabbos? Or he's going to look at another rabbi who's protecting the perpetrators and the abusers and doesn't even understand the depth of his trauma. And you know what I did? What the Naim Alei Malach says, the Mishnah Bab Metzia Hechzik boy. I just held on to him. I held on to him. I literally embraced him. He put his head on my shoulder and he started to cry. He started to cry and he said, one day I'll get there. One day I'll be able to keep Shabbos. Yes, when we are talking about a very wholesome situation where my children feel connected to me, where they have the 4 S's, they feel safe, secure, seen, and soothed, where there's deep attachment and deep connection, where their identity is solid and powerful. So there's a person who feels their own value. Yes, you are 1,000% right. You're not disagreeing with me because I agree with you 1,000%. But when I am facing a person, for whatever reason, is zerbrochen auf Sticker, their heart is torn in 1,000 pieces. There's no person there. There's no self-value. That's why they're numbing themselves. They're escaping their pain. They'll say, I'll do anything, but just get me out of my body. Get me out of my consciousness. My brain is too scary. And they'll do anything to numb themselves. When I'm talking to that child, I speak about Chris's and Mrs. Besdin. Great, I wish. Skila Srei for Herek Chenek, which is the fastest Misa. Take me to the gallows. That's what his own best friend did. That's what he saw another girl do.
Rabbi Jacobson, I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your passion. I'm grateful for your eloquence. The Baruch Shalom should give you kaiches. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you.